Today's episode of Among the Missing contains content that may be distressing to some listeners, particularly those triggered by references to sexual assault. Listener discretion is advised. Here's an excerpt from a case report published in March of 1985, authored by P. Malek Ahmadi and M. L. Ramsey. A 20-year-old white male subject without a history of psychiatric disorder developed hallucinations and paranoid symptoms following ingestion of 540 milligrams of codeine over a period of 36 hours. The symptoms reached an intensity where hospitalization became necessary, but no specific treatment was required. In less than 72 hours, the patient completely recovered from his symptoms and was subsequently discharged. In view of the available data on the neurochemical effects of opiates and non-narcotic analgesics, it was concluded that the inhibition of prostaglandin biosynthesis or interference with its actions might have caused the psychotic symptoms reported. Here's another from a study of clinical records for patients seen at the National Addictions Management Service from April 2017 to March 2013, with a diagnosis of substance-induced psychotic disorder secondary to codeine use, published by L. Lowe and K. E. Wong. It was found that 11 patients, out of a total of 48, roughly a quarter, with substance-induced psychotic disorder had used codeine cough syrup. The duration of their psychotic episodes ranged from 4 to 38 days, with a mean of 13.5 days. 10 out of the 11 patients needed to be started on antipsychotics. What's clear to me from these studies is even moderate use of codeine outside of clinical guidelines for maximum dosage, when combined with cough syrup, in other words, lean, can cause some pretty serious psychotic episodes that could lead to things like, thinking you're talking to God, maybe thinking the world is going to explode if you leave the house on New Year's Eve. Let's say Elaine was having one of those episodes, and it started around New Year's Eve. Based on these studies and the duration range found in the Lowe and Wong study, it's totally possible that it was still going on when she disappeared, and if she used more lean during that time, that could have exacerbated the symptoms. Let's rewind back to the beginning of part 1 of this episode, where we talked about Elaine promising to pay Susan back the $20 she borrowed on the Friday night, that she was planning on doing so in cash, and that it was clear that she didn't have any plans to spend the night at Devine's. Well, perhaps this has something to do with why she did end up staying. Based on their history, what was contained in Elaine's Snapchat videos, and what Daisy had to say in her interview with Jayden, it was clear that Devine and Elaine did lean together often. And in my eyes, that introduces the possibility that maybe they'd done it that night too. And if she had, and she was already in the middle of a psychotic break, well, who knows where that might have led. What we do know, according to Devine, is that the night before Elaine vanished, she was acting really strange. He says she got up super early, was singing and dancing to herself, got dressed faster than anyone he'd ever seen, barely said a word to him, and then pretty much just left. He told both Daisy and Susan this happened at 4 a.m, but this doesn't match the time on the CCTV footage, and after those initial conversations, his statement on the time changed to her leaving at 6 a.m. Devine claims that neither of them used drugs or alcohol that night, but he was being interviewed in front of his parents at the time, and, as you might remember from the previous episode, things with his parents were already on tenterhooks, and he was feeling like they could kick him out any day. Add in the use of drugs, not to mention a missing girl, to that equation, and the tension could have ramped up significantly. I'm not saying Devine lied about their drug usage that night, but I can see what might have led him to, if he did. Devine says when Elaine left, he tried to stop her, but she ignored him and just left, barely speaking 2 words to him. From there, on the CCTV, we can see Elaine pretty briskly charging out of Devine's guest house, heading toward her car, before the footage cuts off at 6:05 a.m. Looking at all of that, Elaine acting strange, the singing and dancing at 4 a.m, getting dressed extremely fast, the fact that she barely engaged with Devine, and that, whatever was going on, in his eyes it was enough to try to convince her not to leave on her own, all of this is consistent with someone potentially suffering from some kind of mental break. The saddest part of all of it, of course, is that Elaine was right. Her world did end up exploding, just not on New Year's Eve. I'm Troy Taylor, and this is Among the Missing. Let's shift gears for a second and talk a little more about Elaine's cell phone. When the phone was taken, along with all of Elaine's belongings, and her car, to the Glendale Police Department on February 2, they charged it and attempted to gain access, but unfortunately, without any concept of what the PIN might be, they weren't able to. A couple of weeks later, the phone, the car, and all of its contents were released back to Susan Park, and from there, Susan, after unsuccessfully trying a couple of PIN codes herself, headed out on a mission to determine if any of Elaine's friends knew what it was. Sadie didn't, and Daisy, as mentioned earlier, thought she might, so she and Susan met up at a Starbucks one day, and Daisy also unsuccessfully gave it a try. When none of the PIN numbers worked, a $450 reward was put out to the public for anyone who might know Elaine's PIN to come forward, but nobody ever did. From there, Jayden took possession of Elaine's handset, exploring different ways to potentially get into it, but that too was fruitless. Finally, when Susan got a tip that the PIN could have been the 4 numbers that equated to the word fuck, Jayden input it into the handset, and, unfortunately, that was the last PIN code attempt. From there, the phone needed to go through the full recovery process. And without the PIN code or passwords, Elaine's phone was locked for good. The biggest problem with this was that Elaine's iCloud had stopped backing up around 24 hours before she disappeared, so while her iCloud account was connected to her laptop, and Susan and Jayden were able to get access to it, the critical time period leading up to her disappearance was lost. Eventually, the Malibu crew passed the handset off to Celebrite, the organisation that high-level government agencies use to access locked devices, and they were able to get access, not to the handset itself initially, but to the data it contained, as well as what the PIN code was. Turns out, curiously, the PIN code was actually the 4 digits of Divine's street address. The final thing I found interesting in Daisy's interview was when Jayden asked her whether she thought Elaine had driven to PCH that morning. Daisy's response seems steadfast, no, almost like she believes it's impossible that Elaine went there. And then she goes on to say something that I found kind of peculiar, and, to this day, doesn't really appear to have been explained.
So you know that her vehicle was found down on PCH. So, is it? What do you think about that? Do you think she drove down there?
No. Well,
No?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because why would she go like just down there? And it was only 19 minutes from his house. So why did she drive? She's trying to go far. Like 19 minutes is not far from that guy's house.
I found myself questioning, why did Daisy think that 19 minutes wasn't far enough away from Divine's house? It feels like she's suggesting Elaine was trying to get away from Divine, and that 19 minutes away wasn't far enough. Unfortunately, while I've reached out to Daisy a number of times, she doesn't want to talk right now. Hopefully, that'll change in the future. But for now, all we're left with are unanswered questions. What I do know is this. Daisy was one of the first people to talk to Divine about Elaine's disappearance, and she was the only one of her friends to talk to him. Susan tells me when she met Daisy to discuss Elaine's phone PIN, Daisy already had Divine's phone number. I don't know if Daisy had met Divine, but one of the other things I found strange about Daisy's conversation with Jayden is the way she refers to Divine seems to oscillate a little. One minute, she's calling him the guy, and then it's Div, and then it's back to the guy again. It's pretty well established that she does know him at the time of the interview, that she'd spoken to him directly about what happened the night before Elaine disappeared. So why the switch between the personal and very impersonal references to him? Well, I'm not entirely sure. But I do have one thing to add to that. In March of 2017, somewhere around the 12th, a massive physical search was organised for Elaine. A lot of her friends and family were there, out searching the rough terrain, trying to find any possible sign of her. But there were a few people who, surprisingly, were absent. Her dad, Ray, was one of them, But more importantly, Divine wasn't there. And neither was Daisy. It's been reported that at some point during the day, Divine's mum, Tonya, had driven her Range Rover past headquarters multiple times. Eventually, she pulled up at a stop sign nearby, rolled her window down, and yelled at another one of Elaine's friends, Danielle. "Are you Daisy? Are you Daisy, you little bitch?" When Danielle said no, she wasn't, Tonya rolled her window up and drove quickly away. Before she did, though, Danielle passed her a handful of Elaine's missing persons flyers, hopeful she could distribute them. A few hours later, in the direction Tonya had driven, there was a stack of posters, just like the ones Tonya had been given, found strewn all over the road, almost like they'd been thrown out of a car window. Nobody I've spoken to, and even Daisy herself, has any idea why Tonya was screaming out for Daisy that day. As far as I know, Tonya never got in touch with Daisy. Nobody's managed to ask Tonya about it, and it's just another thing we're left without answers on. Oh, and there's one more thing I think makes sense to throw in here. Daisy says in her interview with Jayden that she hadn't seen or talked to Elaine in around a month and a half, which, based on what I can see across Elaine's communications, remembering of course that Snapchat messages disappear, so I only have a portion of those, seems accurate. But there's something that suggests that maybe this isn't entirely accurate. Remember Daisy saying that Elaine had stopped talking to both her and their other friend Elizabeth? Well, at 8:55 a.m. on January 26, 2 days before Elaine went missing, Elizabeth tweeted something kinda interesting. It said, "My sister was so pissed at me, and Daisy and Elaine came to pick me up." Maybe there's nothing to all of it, but you know what? I'm not so sure about that. There's something I left out of both Sadie and Daisy's interviews with Jayden Brandt from part 1 of this episode, because it's something I wanted to look at in isolation from everything else. It's an uncomfortable thing to discuss, but for that very reason, it absolutely needs to be. Here's Jayden talking to Sadie.
Do you know anything about an event that happened summer of 2015? Did she ever talk to you about anything that happened?
She had told me again on New Year's Eve that she had been raped. I asked her about it. It was a night at a show, a concert she was at, and she got really drunk and she blacked out.
Were you with her?
I wasn't with her that night, but I saw her the next morning because she had left her car out in Santa Ana, lost her keys, lost everything. She was had no idea what happened the next morning, so she called me and I came to help her, try and get her car and all of her stuff together.
Okay. Did you ever find out from her or anybody else any information about what happened? Or?
I asked her, all she said about that to me was that she was upset with Daisy because Daisy was with her that night and she thinks Daisy left her. You know if she just randomly realized that she had been, or if it just came back to her one day, she just remembered it. Okay. I honestly have no idea, but she had been tweeting about it.
What did she tweet about?
Telling all of her friends. She was tweeting about the rape.
And I obviously haven't looked at the tweets, but when she tweeted and said, "You know who you are, you know what you did," who do you think she was referring to?
She said the people involved know who they are, and I'm not pressing charges. I think she thought Daisy wasn't a good friend to her because she had left her when she was super drunk like that. I think she was upset with Daisy, but obviously Daisy wasn't involved. She didn't think Daisy was involved, but I know she was upset with her, and I think she knows who the guy is, but she didn't tell me who it was. Elaine.
You think Elaine? And do you know, is that a person you're familiar with, she's familiar with, other than just knowing their music? Or you? Yeah,
just listen to his music, and I guess she was backstage that night, and they met, but they never really talked. They didn't talk after or anything.
But he's not in a friend group, or he doesn't have any connection to any friends, to good friends of yours. Okay.
And here's Daisy on the same subject.
She was saying she was tweeting weird things, she was going on a rant on Twitter, talking about something that happened to her back in 2015, and like, but I personally didn't read them. She had said that she felt like she had gotten molested or something like that. And it was at first I had no idea what she was talking about, but I couldn't have possibly thought of anywhere that had happened. You know, I was trying to think hard, but then I reached out to another one of our friends, and I reached out to him because he would always tell Elaine, like, I'll fly you out, come to Atlanta, because he lives over there. He said, come to Atlanta, I'll fly you out, or whatever. So I was like, wait, what if he actually did it or something, you know? So I reached out to him and asked him, and he said that, no, that he hadn't spoken to her. It was the summer of 2015. We went to a concert in Orange County, and I guess it had happened there. And she was just trying to figure it out. So I guess she was, like, calling him to ask him, like, hey, do you remember anything that happened that day? Like, she was just trying to, like, collect everybody's...
Any reason why she would be revisiting that?
Yeah, I have no idea. That's another weird thing to me, because it's like that night has always been a blur. Like, for a really long time, her and I we would always talk about it. Like, she'll be like, I wonder what happened, because it was bad. I remember she lost her car keys. Like, we got stranded all the way to Orange County. And I live in the valley. She was with me. I think we were living together at that time. And we were, like, stranded over there. It was, like, a really bad night. And, like, we never, like, ever, like, figured anything out. Just little random things would happen. Like, we'll go to, like, an event, and then some guy would come up to us and, like, just start talking to her about, like, that night. Like, oh, do you don't remember me? And she'll just be really confused, like, super confused. Like, just, like, little bits and pieces would, like, show up, you know, like, but we never really found out what happened that night, and I don't know why she.
Did anybody?
Maybe somebody like messaged her recently in those months that month and a half that I didn't talk to her. Maybe she found something out, because she was really like trying to figure out what happened that day. Like now, like recently, and that's what's weird.
But do you know anyone that might have been involved in that? Who else was with you guys?
It was just like all of our friends. So it was like Elizabeth and I believe like my boyfriend. He wasn't my boyfriend at the time, but now he is. I'm pretty sure he was there. But the thing is, we had lost Elaine that day. Yeah, and then so we lost Elaine that night. I remember we went there and it was okay. They even took us to the back because we knew like the rappers. And we went to the back, but then me, my friend Viviana and I, we didn't want to be in the back anymore. So we're like, whatever, we're just gonna go to the crowd. And Elaine stayed, and Viviana and I left. After that, we didn't see Elaine the whole concert, like at all. We weren't with her the whole time. And then at the end of it, we're like kind of looking for her, and because we all came together. So I was like, "Where's Elaine? Where's Elaine?" And then she came up to me, like she just kind of came up to me, and then I was like, where were you? Like I was just talking to her, and then that was that. And then we were looking for her car keys. We're like, where are your keys? And she just didn't even know where they were at. We looked everywhere. I went to the back, and then that was that. And then the next day, or like I want to say like in the weekend, we went to another event, and then that's when she started to like say, oh, I think something happened that night. But she didn't give it much like thought, like how she was recently.
The sexual assault appears to have happened at the Observatory in Santa Ana on July 27, 2015, at a Father and Playboy Cardi concert. According to one of her friends, she blocked it out for about a year and a half, but in December 2016, something triggered the memory. He said people had started telling her what happened, and Elaine admitted she'd been trying to ignore it, but she couldn't anymore. She made a decision to speak out, and in late December, she tweeted about it. Some of her friends saw the tweets and checked in with her. She told them she was okay, and they accepted that. Then, not long after, Elaine deleted the tweets and began the process of healing. In both her tweets and her conversation with Divine on the subject, she said she didn't have any plans to press charges, but she did want the people responsible to know she remembered, that she hadn't forgotten what they did. And as you can imagine, it had a profound effect on Elaine. And that's when she began distancing herself, in particular from Daisy and Elizabeth, two of the friends who'd been there with her that night. Neil and Mike from To Live and Die in LA said they brought the info to the detective working on Elaine's case, hoping it might help. But the police couldn't do anything. Not unless Elaine had filed a report herself. And she never did, so, unfortunately, there was nowhere to go with it. To this day, it's not clear who was involved in the attack. And with Elaine gone, it probably never will be, unless somebody else comes forward. Because the sad reality is, in this type of situation, there's almost never just one victim. It's a horrible, heartbreaking part of Elaine's story, and I hate that we have to even talk about it. But we do, because it's worth considering if it might have played a role, even if just a small one, in what happened to her. She was finally speaking out, finally trying to face something she'd buried for over a year. And then, just a few weeks later, she was gone. And the most devastating part is, if it was connected to her disappearance, it'd be almost impossible to prove, unless someone talks. It's like trying to solve a third-party abduction, something we'll go into in a future episode. When a random person is involved, without witnesses, the odds of ever knowing the truth are close to zero. I want to end the discussion about the essay on Elaine on this thought. Elaine was just 18 years old at the time it happened, barely an adult, and she went through something nobody should ever be subjected to. If the people responsible for this are listening, I hope they never get the luxury of being able to forget what they did. I hope they never feel like they got away with it. Elaine might not have pressed charges, but that doesn't mean they're off the hook. They're on borrowed time right now. Their day will come. It might not be today or tomorrow, next month or next year, but eventually, it will. Let's talk about cyanide, and, in particular, cyanide that was found in the bloodstream of Michelle Westervelt when she was rushed to the hospital in March of 2020. Well, on the back of that discovery, I got in touch with the medical examiner's office, and I also sourced a copy of Michelle's full autopsy to try to figure out why the discrepancy between the cause of death reported by the hospital and that reported by the medical examiner's office. And it turns out that, yes, the doctor who examined Michelle at the hospital had determined the cause of death to be cyanide poisoning, for a number of reasons. One, of course, was the extremely high levels of it found in the tests the hospital performed on Michelle while she was in their care. The other, well, here's an extract from the coroner's investigation narrative document, outlining data provided by the hospital. The death was reported to our office on 3/25/2020 at 8:56 a.m. by hospital personnel. It was reported the decedent called 911 at 2:21 a.m. after she and her husband were using fentanyl on 3/25/2020, and they started feeling ill. Paramedics responded and transported the decedent to the hospital, where the decedent received 4 rounds of Narcan. The decedent became alert and stated she used fentanyl regularly. The decedent was not able to recover in the hospital and was pronounced dead in the emergency room. The decedent had a medical history of asthma and drug use. There was no trauma or foul play noted. No drugs or alcohol reported. Admission blood was requested. A urine test screen found the decedent was positive for amphetamine. The decedent was also found to have high levels of cyanide. Despite all life-saving measures, the decedent was pronounced dead on 3/25/2020 at 8:19 a.m. by Dr. Eichner. There are a couple of key things to note in that. Obviously, the fact that the admission tests picked up the cyanide is a big one. But then there's also the Narcan. Narcan is, essentially, a reverse agent for an opioid overdose. Usually, a single dose of Narcan can reverse the effects and be life-saving to those suffering from an overdose of things like heroin, fentanyl, or prescription opioids. What's strange is, Michelle was given 4 doses of Narcan. 4. And yet she still passed away. The other thing that confused me was the note that there were no drugs or alcohol reported. The document states that Michelle came to enough to tell hospital staff she'd taken fentanyl, and that she was a regular user of it. So why does the document say that there was no report of these things? It's likely just an administrative error, but still. And here's the real kicker. This is an extract from the coroner's report regarding the autopsy on Michelle from the summary and opinion section. This 37-year-old woman, Michelle Westervelt, died of the combined effects of fentanyl and methamphetamine toxicity according to the medical examiner investigator's report and obtained medical records, Ms. Westervelt had a history of asthma and drug abuse. On March 25, 2020, she was reportedly using drugs with her significant other when they both began feeling ill after using fentanyl. 911 was called and an ambulance transported Ms. Westervelt to the emergency room. 4 rounds of Narcan were administered, at which point she was able to state that she regularly used fentanyl. Urine drug screen in the hospital detected amphetamines. A COVID-19 test was performed and was negative. Laboratory studies revealed lactic acidosis, which is commonly seen with overdoses and result in hyperperfusion to the tissues and organs of the body. Despite life-saving efforts, she was pronounced dead in the emergency room. Autopsy revealed no fatal trauma. There were ischemic changes to the small intestine and kidneys, supportive of hyperperfusion, lack of blood flow, and multi-organ failure. Toxicity performed on post-mortem specimens revealed the presence of fentanyl, not administered at the hospital, and methamphetamine. Cyanide was not performed during hospitalization. Post-mortem test for cyanide was attempted. However, there was a specimen leakage during transport, and it could not be performed. Based on the history, circumstances, and autopsy as I currently know them, the manner of death is accident due to the intake of drugs, being fentanyl and methamphetamine. So, it turns out the medical examiner requested bloods to be tested for the presence of cyanide post-mortem. A collection was taken, and the vial was sent away for testing. Only, the sample never got tested because, as it turns out, the vial was damaged in transport, leaked, and there was not enough fluid left to perform the test. And here's the other thing. The ME mentions that changes to Michelle's organs were supportive of a thing called hyperperfusion, which is consistent with overdoses. But you know what? After a little bit of digging, I discovered it can also be consistent with, yep, good guess, cyanide poisoning. I thought it was also interesting that the ME says cyanide was not performed during hospitalization. It doesn't make sense to me, because the hospital report says they found high levels of cyanide in Michelle's bloodstream, so it must have been tested in hospital. So is this simply a combination of the ME missing the fact that this test was, in fact, completed at the hospital, and their own test being unable to be completed because the sample was damaged in transport, so the cause of death was therefore simply declared as an accidental overdose? Well, I've posed that question, and also asked if a follow-up sample and test was ever received to the LA County Medical Examiner's Office. So far, I haven't heard anything back on that front, but when I do, trust me, you'll be the first to know. Once the floodgates of Elaine's social media data began to open, they really began to open. I'd already gone through Elaine's Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat with a fine-tooth comb, and had finally decided to take a little time out to spend with my family, who had definitely been suffering from the increasing absence of their dad and husband, as I found myself going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole on Elaine's disappearance. But what started as a leisurely family picnic in the garden turned pretty quickly to me devouring my lunch like it was my last meal on death row, and racing back to my laptop when the ding of 2 new email messages rang through on my phone. The look I got from my wife at the time gave me the distinct impression that if I picked my phone up right then, there was every chance I, myself, would come up missing sometime soon. But when you get started on this kind of thing, trying to help find a missing person, particularly when the case is so bizarre and complicated, like Elaine's is, it becomes all-consuming. It turns into an obsession, and, at times, it's like everything around you just ceases to exist. And that's exactly what had started to happen. Days with my family slowly started diluting to half days, down to hours, down to maybe an hour at dinner time, or maybe a quick story at bedtime. With every step further into the mystery of Elaine's disappearance, and with a persistent feeling that we were just about there, so close to answers, that world narrowed more and more, focusing on taking that last step, the one that, to this day, hasn't really eventuated, yet at least, of finding Elaine. So yeah, when those dings came through, everyone on that picnic rug knew exactly what would happen next. And, within a few minutes, I was in front of my laptop, egg sandwich and beer in hand, looking at 2 new email messages from Susan Park. The first was Elaine's Spotify records, which, all it could really be was a list of songs she listened to, right? So I wasn't too excited about that one. The other was something I hadn't expected, an extract from a second Instagram account Elaine had, That one piqued my interest. But I did what all highly disorganized people should do, and started with the boring one. Only it turned out it wasn't boring. I hadn't at all expected what I found in Elaine's Spotify records. Not only did it contain a list of the songs she listened to, it also contained time and date records for each song, whether the song played on continuously from the previous song, or whether it was specifically selected to play, or if the back or next button was hit, essentially giving me an outline of whether Elaine was interacting with it at the time, or whether it was just left to play out on its own. And it also included both the IP address of the network the music was being listened on, and the device itself that was being used to listen. There were a few really important things I gained from that information. The first was what the IP address of Elaine's home Wi-Fi network was. And if you're wondering how I managed to confirm that it was indeed her Wi-Fi network address, well, that's easy. I cross-referenced all of the times she was using Spotify with her Snapchat videos and photos, until I found a crossover showing her listening to music on Spotify at the same time as being home on Snapchat. And the other was a couple of key times she was listening to music. The first one of interest was when she started streaming Spotify at around 1:15 a.m. on the morning of Thursday, January 26. Just to give you a reminder on what was going on then, the night before is when Elaine, Sadie and Emily went to the kickback in Glendora, a town about 45 minutes away from Elaine's house. And it's also the morning Elaine broke down on the 210-118 freeway interchange at roughly 3:40 a.m. with no gas and battery issues. The interesting thing was, at around 2:05 a.m., when Elaine was still listening to Spotify, the IP address changed from one belonging to the Verizon cellular data network to the IP address of the Park family home, meaning she'd come home after the party that morning. She hadn't gone out somewhere else and then ended up broken down on the freeway merge. She'd gone home, but something had drawn her back out into the night. Not just out into the night, but out into the night with absolutely no gas in her tank. What that was? Well, there's nothing in any of her communication with anyone that morning to explain that. Her friends don't appear to know either. They too thought she was going home for the night because she received 2 messages via Snapchat from friends that were at that party at different times of the morning, both checking in to make sure she'd made it home safely. And the other key piece of information contained in her Spotify data related to the night before she went missing. You'll recall that Divine and Elaine went to the movies that night and returned back to Divine's guest house at around 1 a.m. In Divine's recollection of events, they went to sleep not long after this, and the next thing he knew, in his original statements to Susan and Daisy at least, it was 4 a.m. and Elaine was up, singing and dancing and getting dressed, which he thought was bizarre behaviour. And, in isolation of any other information, it probably is. But, if Elaine was listening to music at the time, would it have actually been that strange? Because she was. Not only was she listening to music, she was interacting with Spotify all the way through the night, from the time they returned back to Divine's guest house, right through until about 4 in the morning. And she'd been streaming it via the mobile data network because she'd already deleted Divine's Wi-Fi from her phone, so there was no automatic connection made, which, I've got to say, I also found kind of fascinating. She made the time to delete his Wi-Fi from her phone, but she left her passcode as a street address. Anyway, once I'd processed all of the Spotify data, I moved on to Instagram. This was a much smaller account than the previous one. There was little to look at in terms of likes, friends lists, and even DMs. It was pretty clear that this one was just one of Elaine's throwaway accounts, probably not much interest to anyone. I ran through everything that was contained in the included HTML file, account creation data, likes and comments, posts, etc. And then I came across the account login and logout data. I clicked into the logout data first, scrolled down to look at the period between the Thursday, 2 days before Elaine disappeared, and February 2nd, the date her car was found on Pacific Coast Highway. There was nothing. And then I opened the login data and ran through that too. It could be split into 2 sections. One was prior to her disappearance, and the other was after about February 16, after Susan received Elaine's devices back, and she and Jayden began deep diving into everything. There was nothing out of place that I saw initially, nothing that jumped out at me. There were your standard logins from the mobile cellular data network, a couple of logins from 2013 from the Park family Wi-Fi, and that's about it. I wolfed down the rest of my egg sandwich, sculled the dregs of my beer, and was just about to close my laptop screen when I spotted something. It turns out there was something out of place there, in amongst all of the standard logins from her home and the cell network. There was a login from somewhere that had never logged in before, at 11:30 a.m. the day before Elaine disappeared. And it wasn't just an attempted login, it was a successful login. From a location I would never have expected to see in any of Elaine's data. Someone had logged in all the way from Kiev, Ukraine. And it wasn't the only time that had happened. But that's next time on Among the Missing. Thanks for listening to Among the Missing. If you know anything about what happened to Elaine, or where she is, a reward fund of $25,000 cash is still on offer. If you'd like any more information on the reward, or you have any information relating to Elaine's disappearance whatsoever, please visit our website at amongthemissingpodcast.com, where you can send us a message or leave us a voicemail. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Among the Missing Podcast. If you've got any questions you'd like to be addressed in our Q&A episodes, please visit our website at amongthemissingpodcast.com and either send us a message or leave us a voicemail. Among the Missing is a production of FTM Media, produced by Troy Taylor, Mark Teruli, and Fred Scherzer. Written by Troy Taylor. Our theme song is Lucid Symphony by Dirty Freaks. Elaine Park is still a missing person, and her case is still open with the Glendale Police Department. If you have any information about her whereabouts, please contact them on 818-548-3135 and mention Elaine's case number 171512.